My name is Jessica Saunders and I am the Director of Salix Games, and I am here to talk to you today about how to communicate your vision without necessarily relying on basic art skills. So who am I and why you should listen to me? I have a background in audio, so absolutely nothing to do with anything visual. I was a sound designer in AAA studios, working for people like Rare, Lionhead, and Rocksteady before I started my own company, Salix Games, in 2015, 2016. And since then, we've been kicking out games and prototypes with what I believe is a very high visual quality. And it was kind of brought to my attention that I know, how do I get that across to the audience and to my artists involved when I myself can barely draw a stick man. So here is a couple slides of some of the games that I've made. On the left here we have our first debut release, which was Dulac and Faye Dance of Death. And the second two are prototypes, which we have been pitching around to try and get funding for, under the names of Hackful and Maze. So as you can see, like from these little clips, they've got a really beautiful and I think rather unique look to each of them. And basically what I'm going to talk through today is just how we got there in the end. I am going to say, I'm not an artist. I would never in a million years call myself an artist. I do, however, love art. I have a great interest in art. I'm big on research. But one of the biggest things I found that helps is I find it very easy to see things visually in my head. And so the biggest challenge for me was actually I can see exactly what I want. How do I then convey that when I don't have the technical language? So I'm hoping if you want someone with big ideas but struggles visualizing, hopefully this will provide you with some good starting points. So your art skills are minimal. How do we create a great looking game? For me, the most important thing is step one: know what you want. This is the most complete important thing. If you don't know what you're after, no one else can. No, you can't convey that. I know it is easier said than done. Art evolves and changes, and it will evolve and change with the project as that comes along. There's no right or wrong. It's just whether the visuals do what you need them to do. Do they present? Do they emote? Do they give what the net game needs? So we start with the really, really basics. Do you know what style you're after? Do you know what you want your game to look like? Do you want 2D? Do you want 3D? Do you want cartoony? If you don't know this, that's your first point of call. I really recommend Instagram for ideas, because, hang on, let's get that playing. There we go. You can just scroll through, and if you just look up something as simple as the word art, you can see thousands of different pieces, styles, genres, and just really get an idea of, what's out there, because especially with game technology now, you can really achieve almost anything you want. But yes, you need to have that starting image. You need to know what genre you are going for. Also, Instagram is great for just talking to artists. So if you do find someone online that you actually really like, you can approach them and say, hey, would you like to be involved with this? This is what we did with Dulac and Faye. Often I find with projects and creating a visual experience, everything kind of starts with one image. There's an image that really kicks off everything else, a complete chain of events. And these are the three images that really kicked off the three projects and how they looked visually. So I've came across the work of Jan Alberto for Dulac and Faye, and he did these wonderful stylized caricatures. And for me, that was just like, I want to see a game like that. I want to see a game with those slightly skewed proportions. I think there's something quite comedic but serious about them at the same time. So I approached Ian, and he very kindly came onto the project as our initial concept artist. For the second project, Hackful, it started with this kind of mandala in a forest. So this is by a tattoo artist who goes out and does some very, very hippie things. And one of the things she does is she goes and makes offerings in the woods with fruit and vegetables and other living things. And I kind of saw this and I was like, it's a very strange mixture of kind of nature and complete unnatural at the same time. Even though it's made of everything natural, food, plants, etc., it's something that just doesn't belong in a forest. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of a still life, which again I think is very much like that. You know, you've got the painting people, someone's actually sat down and put together that bowl of fruit to draw it, to paint it, to become something, when that is very much a man-made thing. And the final one that really clicked me was I bought a new house, and this was in my back garden. I had this wonderful doorway to nowhere, and the entire game basically came out the premise of what's behind that door. You know, what will I find? Let's go on an adventure. And maybe kind of really wanted to start doing something with a little more realism as opposed to more artistically stylized as the other two projects. So the big question is, how do we go from this initial image to the games? Obviously, they look very, very different. As I said, art is a process. Game development, as you all know, is a long process. And the results can be drastically different. But your job ultimately is the creative director or the director of the project is to impart your vision and to make sure things get done to realize that vision and to keep the team on track. Ultimately, if you don't know what style of game you want, if you don't have an idea of what you want it to be visually, whether it's, you know, very realistic, very cartoony, and you're in this kind of I know it when I'll see it kind of mode, you are not ready to make that thing yet, because your team is relying on you to know. It is not their job to go off and waste their time doing hundreds of thousands of sketches until you see what you want. It's your job to know what will fit best with the gameplay, what will fit best with the genre, and to go from there. So other big pieces of advice is don't pretend. Don't pretend to know anything about art that you do not know. You've hired a team and they're the ones that know what's going on. So just embrace your lack of skill, you know, run with it. You know, it's a bit of a comedy value, you know, if you can only draw stickmen, embrace your entire lack of skill. Do not bullshit your art team. If you don't want to, if you're going to start using language that doesn't actually make sense and the way to try and seem clever, it's just going to backfire on the end. Leave your ego at the door. These people know more than you, and that's a good thing. Be a sponge. Ask your artist lots of questions when you're out and about. If you like to go to museums, galleries, etc., again, just ask lots of questions. Your job is to be a sponge. You know, you may be the leader of the team, but you are there to learn from them as well. Like, it's a whole beautiful process. Which kind of brings me back to the thing is you've hired your team well. They are better than you will ever be at this project, at this particular skill. And this is a good thing. You want to hire people on your team who are better than you at things. The whole idea is that you will work together. You have this idea and you want to cohesively bring it together. And you need people who are fantastic at that. You want to be proud of your team and bring in these incredible artists. And so, yeah, treat them with respect. Don't waste their time. Pay them a fair wage, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to make your game look fantastic. So one of my big first things I always say is to embrace the stickman. As I said, my art skills are very minimal, but a decent artist with a few lines of text and a stickman can come across with something incredible. I've got a few examples here. So in Delac and Fay, we have a few animated visions. We really wanted some kind of painterly pieces to kind of show that. And, you know, I wanted to give across a storyboard, a little concept before it went off to the artist, say, like, this is kind of what we need to really kind of cut his time down. And yeah, that's what he got. He got Merlin hurt in the woods, little stick man, some blood, the end. And that's pretty much what I left him with. To be fair, Romain had been on the project for a little while. So when he came back a week later with this, it just made perfect sense. He saw my little stick man. He knew what I want. He knew the style of the game. We had been very clear about everything in the previous, and he just knocked it out of the park straight away from my little stick man. And that happened again when we did that second piece of thing. So here is my woman. I wanted to kind of go, ta-da, like a bit of magic. Again, that's as far as my skills go. And then ultimately what Romain created in the end, which was just absolutely stunning. We then got these kind of 2.5D animated for the final project, which was just utterly fantastic. Excuse me. The next kind of biggest things I want to kind of talk about is reference. Everything is reference, 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 reference. Your phone is ultimately your best friend. I spend a lot of time on mine. I'm sure you all spend a lot of time on yours. If you're scrolling through Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, if you're in 2012 or whatever, just take screen captures of everything, save as much as you can. If you think things look cool, just take it, note down artists, all of that. You know, I have just hundreds and thousands of notes on my phones just because you never know what will be helpful in the future. It's all great for giving direction of, you can kind of immediately show, oh, I want something like this, but like this, and kind of matching the two together. So here's just a little bit from my phone reel, which we used for our Maze project. I just basically went out and about, walk on my local town, and just took pictures of everything, all the flowers, all the leaves, the trees, some of the structures. We really wanted this kind of classical realism with kind of traditional English gardens, and we're very lucky that in my area and my town there's actually a lot of places like this where we can go and get visual reference. We even went so far as taking the team out to the day for Wisley Gardens, and the whole team just spent an entire day taking pictures that we could take reference from. This was especially important for this project as we were going for a much more realistic visuals than we perhaps previously would have done. We wanted to kind of push the realism so far in many cases that it would become surreal with some of the more characters, such as in the case of the Mothman, which we saw right at the beginning. But yeah, that was a really fun day. It's a great excuse to go out and see things. Once you see things kind of more hands-on, it gives you a much better idea of how to put everything in place, how to just really bring everything together cohesively. So after us taking thousands of photos and kind of going back and going, okay, well, what do we like best? What are the good features? What do we like about this style of hedges? What do we like about this style of tree? What do we like about this color palette? We started to put everything together. And as you can see, the reference really shines through with this particular project. You know, we've got the beautiful magnolia trees that were out in season in spring. The kind of very topiary kind of defined hedges, and the stonework is just basically just lifted off bits and pieces we found around the area. It really was just a case of, it really is just a case of trying to get your image across as quickly as possible. And the thing that I kind of really go for when it comes to this style is pushing the idea of what I call the 3 C's, which is ultimately, first off, the 3 C's. Be clear. If you can, show, don't tell. This is what, again, I mean by referencing. If you can show an artist something directly, they'll get a much better idea of what you want. And again, makes the whole process a lot smoother. I say regardless, just write everything down. As I said, have notes on your phone, have a Google Drive, have a OneDrive, whatever method of choice that you use, Miro boards, whatever. Have everything written down as much as possible. All your notes from the very beginning idea of characterizations for things, for your ideas, even if it's things that you're never going to use or things that are cut, keep them. You really don't know when these things will become in handy and are really good just for keeping everyone on top of it and seeing what's going on. Make it available to everyone. This, I think, is also quite important because it also makes you accountable, because you are the one that's guiding the vision, and you are the one that's ultimately hired this team to work together. It is down to you to keep everyone up to date, to make sure everyone knows what's going on, and for them to be able to see each other's work as well. You know, it is really important that everyone, as clearly and simply as possible, can just go straight somewhere, go, okay, here's my document I'm looking at. It's all here. I'm very much a stickler for documentation, and I found it really helps down the line. A solid description can actually do a lot of heavy lifting if you don't have any visual elements. So when we were originally concepting Delac and Faye, and we were trying to work out, you know, what we wanted our main characters to look like, you know, just kind of like we were umming and ahhing about what we wanted, and then it kind of struck me that I wanted to go something a little bit different. I wanted to flip some tropes. This was kind of during Marvel's big heyday. I think Thor Ragnarok or something was coming out or had just come out. And so the idea basically boiled down to, well, what if Loki was the knight in shining armor, and what if Thor was the mage? I don't know if any of you play kind of like big RPG games, but it's always, you know, the mage is very skinny, he's very slim, she's willowy, she throws herself around, and the sword bearers are these tanks. And absolutely that works in these worlds. It makes complete sense. You know, if you're carrying around with great big armor and a broadsword, you want someone with a lot of muscle. But I thought it'd be quite more interesting if we actually flipped those tropes, especially when it came to Dulac and, spoilers, what Merlin looks like at the end of the game. So this is what Ian came back with when we kind of gave a few little bits of description for what we wanted Dulac to be. And he is a knight. He does carry a sword. He does swing it around. He is a very fearsome warrior. And Merlin, who we decided to bulk up a lot more tattoos, wanted him to be very, very masculine. And yeah, just not what you usually expect of a wizard. We wanted to you know, lose the hat, you know, keep the beard because that's always a bit of fun, but nothing crazy long. We didn't want him to be overly old, etc. And it was just about kind of flipping those tropes. But ultimately, those two drawings came down from that sentence above, and trusting in the artist that we had hired, that he would understand what to do. He knew we wanted his style, and carried that on. Second of my 3 C's, be concise, which I think is really important. Don't overcomplicate things. It's so easy to overcomplicate, to go into far too much detail off the bat and getting down into these tiny little nuance pieces when actually you just want to start off and to break things down. So yes, what I always suggest is you break things down into their elements. You know, start with something simple. You know, do you have just a mood of what you want this game to look like? Does it have a vibe, a feeling? Does everything start with, you know, a face, a character, or simply a color palette? All of these things influence each other and can really start to bring everything together. But the idea is that the reference you give is minimal. You know, 1 page of good reference is better than 20. So I say, yes, hoard everything, take it all, but be prepared to strip it back and to pick your key pieces, as that will give a better image than if you give someone a folder of 500 images and say, go ahead and make that. So as an example for that, for Hackful, we kind of went with the idea of the mandala and things not being quite real. As I mentioned before, you know, this very much surrealist element in a very natural scape. And so we kind of went online and I found these images, which has really kind of started to put the whole game together. You know, it was like, what is this creature in the woods that's bathed in shadows? So down in the bottom left, we got these beautiful pieces of art of just these creatures hiding away where you can just kind of see the eyes. Playing a lot with shadow, which was actually became really important later on. Found this image of people and their faces were just really distorted. And I just thought it was really creepy. You know, Hackful's a horror game ultimately, and one of the creepiest things you can do is kind of play with people's faces. It was also ultimately because it became about from a potential time and money saving option. We thought basically, how do we do lip sync without using lip sync, which I will go into later. So basically, yeah, there was this one page of reference that spawned the visual look of Hackful initially. And here is a still from the final game. So as you can see, it very much kind of ties in with those. The color palettes kind of similar, the lighting, the brushstrokes, everything was kind of referenced in the page before. And my final of the 3 C's is be consistent. You know, you want to stick to your gut. You want to have a very clear vision, but you also want to take advice from your team. If they say, actually, have we thought about making it in third person rather than first person, or having the hands work in a different way, you know, take that advice because it might work. But, you know, you do need to stick to your gut and kind of have a clear image of what the game is and not get sidetracked by a million ideas. You know, a million cooks can ruin everything, but, you know, you need to have that one leading voice. Again, make sure the team is working to the same goal. This goes back to the documentation, having very clear ideas and structures about what you're after, so that the team is all working to the same goal. They know, each person knows what job they're doing, how they're working, and this doesn't really change. And if something does change, the most important thing is let the team know. I can't tell you the amount of projects I've worked on where something very high up has changed and we've been some of the last to know, whether it's been almost the entire genre of the game was changed by someone high up at the last minute, or the entire UI style had been scrapped and redone the night before by someone and audio was never told. And then suddenly it's my job to catch up and try and fix everything in a very short amount of time. The earlier you can let people know about changes to overall styles, tones, etc., or just, oh, we discovered this really cool new thing, we want to implement it, let them know as soon as possible. Communication, again, is just so important when it comes to making video games and getting something across that's really, really cohesive. Ultimately, as again, it boils back to know what you want. If you don't know what you want and you're in that, again, I repeat, I know it when I see it, I just think that's the worst place to be. You know, you really want to have a good idea. You want to be able to see everything in your head, to be able to write it down and have people come and read it and go, okay, no, I get that too. I understand what you are trying to get across. And ultimately, that's what all these little bits and pieces are about. So how does these kind of 3 C's work in reality? So, for example, if we go back to Hackful, I wanted to talk about lighting. Lighting is something I don't know anything about. I don't know the technical terms and things. I just know what I wanted it to look like. So ultimately, we had this one page of reference. We found these 2 incredible artists, Ferdinand Keller and Arnold Böcklin, and it's almost like the paintings have artificial lighting. The darks are very dark, the brights are very bright. And because we're working in a game engine, we can put in artificial lighting everywhere. We can really push that visual element. And so by giving these very few simple examples, it's very clear, it's very concise, and it's consistent throughout the whole game. The lighting is unnatural, but it's unnatural in a way that brings an artistic quality. So we came from these elements to what was in game, which you can see here very clearly that it does have those elements brought back into it. The darks are very dark, the lights are very light, which just adds more and more to this idea that you're walking around in a living painting. Again, another example, we wanted our blacks to be very blacks. There's lots of very rich colors involved here, as well as these great big highlights that just like show the player where to go. It's guiding the player through the world. Devil's in the details. This is where I really get into the nitty-gritty, tiny little niche details. I'm very big on narrative, so I'm very big on characters. And so when it comes to designing characters in the world, I get very into, what they look like, what they're wearing. Mood boards and reference sheets are just my absolute go-to. Like, well before a project starts, I will be putting things together, just, presentations and PowerPoints of just like, this is the mood we're going for. This belongs in this section. This belongs in that section. Some may say it's a little bit overboard, but I am a bit of a control freak, and I really, really like to see everything up front, so that when I start talking and we start making the game, we can really hit the ground running and just ultimately go for it. So again, all boils back to clear, concise, consistent. So when it comes to talking about your characters, for example, in Hackfall, we have a character of the Hunter. I know what I want from him. I've got documents written about his entire backstory, his life, his personality, but that ultimately doesn't help everyone. It only helps some people. It help our writer, but it won't necessarily help our artist to go through and do initial concepting pieces. So how do I get across the idea of the Hunter? Very simply. So we boiled down his visuals to just a few sentences. White male, 40s, Welsh, illegal poacher, well-dressed, highly armed. So some of you will probably see that description and be able to think of something immediately. I took that and again just kind of went and found something, or what can I see that is very much gives that image straight away, one picture. The second point was his face is smeared like a smeared clay sculpture, colors swirl with mood rather than words. This again goes back to what I mentioned earlier about trying to do lip sync without lip sync. And the idea was that we went for a very particular artistic style that would allow the characters to emote without having to do traditional lip sync. So we wouldn't be worried about timing. We wouldn't be worried about dialogue. We could just do kind of sort of looping animations and have set moods. So the one image I kind of found that really hit me for the Hunter while I was going was this chap here. He's from a fashion campaign, but I really liked that he's kind of got this really mean face. He's wearing this really nice tailored outfit. He's the right age group. There's also just something a little bit sinister about him, I thought, like in his face. They could have gone for a very friendly faced model, but I think they went for someone that was really quite scary in some ways. So my beginning of creating the Hunter basically went following down a rabbit hole of this one photograph. So it turns out he was from the Balmoral collection from Musto. So I was having a look through their entire campaign, which basically just follows this gentleman around as he wears all their fancy clothes and pretends to go and shoot things. As I'm going through these documents, I am writing all these little notes constantly. We're talking about, with our visual style, will that pattern even work? Asking lots of questions to the artists. How do we do this? Is that going to be too complicated to make? Is it going to be too complicated to rig? Can we do this? Can't we do this? A lot of little bits of back and forth before you even start designing anything, which again is why I really recommend using pieces of software like Miro or Google Docs, etc., because you can send those to the artists and you can comment back and forth and tick things off, etc., as you go along, which is just really, really helpful. And again, these pictures do a lot of heavy lifting for the artist. It's, here is the color palette. This is what I want this to do. Like when it comes to doing his face, here are the ultimate skin tones that we need to see and how that works. I went as far as literally giving each individual item of his outfit, which again mainly came from the Musto's Balmoral collection, which was really nice and easy to find. I think the boots were something different, and it was just literally going through kind of men's fashion magazines and thinking, okay, well, what is practical but very stylish, and again a little bit out of place in this world. When it came to the faces, we really fell in love with the works of Anthony Rodion, who again, these faces were just so emotive without a face. Like each of these, I think, very much has an emotion, is a little bit creepy, which is what we really wanted. And I really wanted to see, well, what happened when those faces move? How do they talk when they have no mouth, they have no eyes? You can't see where the eye movement is going. You can't lip read anything. You're just got this essential moving mood ring, essentially. And so all of that was given to our character model of Vincent, and with a little bit of back and forth between like textures and patternings. This is what we came up with for the game. We decided to go for a little more realism with the outfit, but really push that kind of creepy element for the face, in that he doesn't have one. But literally, he just came out of that from those pieces of reference. Again, it was very clear, this is what we're after, this is what I would like. Vince said to me, like, because of the way I give my reference over to him, if it's not in the reference document, it probably means he's got a little bit of free range, but if it is in the reference document, that means I very much would like something to be in a particular way. But yeah, I was just so pleased with how the hunter came out for Hackful. I think he's just really creepy, and then we got a great voice actor involved, and the whole thing came together really nicely. My second example, again, is another character example, is from Dance of Death, which is Eve. So Eve was much more of a complicated character because we wanted to do her justice and we wanted to get it exactly right. We had no room for error when it came to Eve. So Eve is a Black woman in Victorian London, and due to the racism of the time, it really put us in one of two camps. She would either have actually been an unfortunate amount of poverty, or she would have actually been welcomed by high society, and she would have been almost a bit of a curiosity. And the whole idea was, well, she goes in knowing this, and she just swindles rich white people out of money, because they believe that because she has darker skin, that she has some kind of mystic abilities. She doesn't. She has none of that. But she gets the public to believe that, she's a very no nonsense sort of woman. And ultimately, this was the simple description that I gave to Aryan and said, this is who I picture in my head. Can you draw her, please? And this was the initial concept we got back. The dress was just fantastic. He kind of went hunting through Victorian dresses. I went hunting through Victorian dresses. And what came up was just absolutely beautiful. So yes, we carry on. We're just trying to give as much information to the artist as possible, because we now have our concept, we have our description. How do we really bring her to life? So I started off with the so simple things as like, well, she's gonna have to talk. She's got a face. She's got a personality. Who really embodies that character for me? And this is where I go for actors, musicians. This is Skin from Skunk and Nancy. She just has the most incredible face. I was thinking Grace Jones, but I thought that was a little bit too obvious, and I just thought she's got much more of a, well, she's a rock star, so a rock star ability about her. And then we spoke to Eve's voice actress, Nina Christopherson, who was really, really involved in the creation of her character as well. And she helped us design Eve's hair, which was a very traditional African hairstyle that's actually coming back in fashion now, which is really nice. It wouldn't have been typical of the time for a woman to have hair like that, but we decided to go for this route to make her stand out, because she is, very proud of who she is, and she doesn't back down for anyone. And again, giving a good color palette. We could go for these really bold colors. And what could she potentially look like? Again, went big on the dresses and the accessories. I really referenced everything. I'm like, this is kind of what I want her jewelry to look like. We were very conscious of like the Victorian etiquette of the time, and like she would have had gloves, but like she wouldn't have had gloves that go past the elbow, for example. What kind of neckline would she have had that's would have been appropriate for the time period, etc., etc. So we found these just incredible pieces of reference, which I believe Aryan actually found himself as well, because one of these images here, which is very, very similar to what his drawing of this kind of black morning dress was. And so yeah, we took these images. Again, we went through a lot of images to find these ones. Really quite excited. These were the ones that really worked best together, and we passed them over to our character artist Vincent again. And this is ultimately what she ended up looking like in game. We decided to make the morning dress bright yellow, just because it's a lot more fun. It's a lot more visually interesting, and it allows for the detail of the dress and the outfit to really be seen. So yeah, again, she was just another character who we were just so pleased with how she came across. And once she was animated and voiced, like she just really came together. And everything about this image, I think you can tell who she is, where she's from, and that she is not someone to be messed with, which is just really fantastic. Yeah, I love this character so much. I was just really wanted to show off this one. So ultimately, in conclusion, know what you want. That is really the ultimate thing when it comes to getting across a decent artistic vision and to talk with artists. Even if you don't know how to describe it, you need to know what you want. The rest can be worked out. You can find ways to get across that information. But if you do not know what you want, you cannot explain that to anyone else. Photograph everything, save everything. You never know what's going to come in handy. It's just buy extra space, buy the phone with the bigger hard drive, get cloud storage, and just, yeah, save everything. If you've got the time, give it a decent naming convention. Otherwise, you're going to be searching through. But yeah, save everything. Trust your team. Again, you have hired these artists for a reason. You want them to have free reign. You want to be able to say, this is what I need, go and create it. And ultimately, that's what we did with all three projects. Was I managed to say, here's some few images, and they basically, in my opinion, took what was out of my head and put it onto the screen. Get creative with your descriptions. Again, you can really get across a lot just from a few lines of text. Again, like with the Loki and Thor example, simple thing, switch the tropes around. You could say something, what if Han Solo was a woman that grew up in New York in 1970. You kind of immediately can visualize what's going on there. And it's like, okay, now I have a starting point. I can go and collect bits and pieces and put all that together. And again, my 3 C's: clear, concise, consistent. If you can get those 3 going for everything, you really are at a running advantage at the beginning, and that ultimately works for all departments. So that was quite a bit of a ramble, as I said, very little sleep. So thank you very much. I do have a bit of time, I believe, for any questions and answers. Yep. But I really hope that you enjoyed my talk today and that you actually got some helpful information out of it. And please, any questions?
Yes, hi Jessica, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I have the mic and I'm gonna pass it around to anybody in the room that might have questions now. So
Sure.
okay, it's incoming.
Okay, first off, thank you. You've said to save as much as you can references. You've said to write everything down, and I guess when you come to an agreement in meetings too.
Yeah.
But you've also said to be concise, and you have shown us pretty concise examples indeed. My question would be how to go about conciliate those 2 things and try not to drown into a sea of references and documentation
Yeah.
and make it accessible for everyone, but also clear to make it easy to search the information you need.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a really good question and a really good point. There's a saying in English, kill your darlings, which I find incredibly important. Basically means don't be afraid to cut things. You know, if you've got all this reference, it might not necessarily be useful for exactly what you're doing at that point. It might be useful later on. It might be better for like the grand scheme of things. It's the idea of going through these documentations, going through your photographs and thinking, okay, well, what is actually the information that I need to get across to create this character? To create this particular outfit, to create this particular environment. And if it doesn't fit those rules, it doesn't need to be included in reference given to someone. And once you start doing this, you can really cut things down. And it's basically, are these images serving what you need to get across in this one particular instance? Same with the documentation. You would not believe the amount of folders that I have that are just simply called old, where I've taken previous information, previous ideas, and just dumped them in another file. And the actual concise information that I give across is usually a new document that I have made where I've just pulled across bits of information from all this other documents I've had going on. And it's okay, well, what do I need to give this one person? What does this script writer need? What does this particular character modeler need? What does this environment artist need? Rather than having one giant big swamp doc of art, it becomes very much this kind of granular method. So yeah, hope that helps.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
More questions coming.
Hi.
Hi.
What do you do more? Do you change your art team or specialize your art team depending on the project, or do you scale or tailor your project based on what your art team skills are, what their ability are?
That's a really good question. That is a really good question. And sadly, the answer is kind of neither of those. Ultimately, what the scale and everything boils down to is the really depressing reality of making games in this day and age: money. What can I afford? You know, I'd love to have a huge team of artists at all time, but unfortunately we can't keep people on for full time. So I have contractors come in and out, and you know, it does boil down to things like, oh, is Romain available for this project? Is Vince free? No, he's not. Okay, well, I've got my little black book from being in the industry for so long. Let's bring some other people in. You know, what's your time schedule like? You know, people have lives outside video games, you know, what's going on with them. So yeah, ultimately, very pragmatically, you know, it does boil down to, you know, what's the timeline, what's the budget, and what can I reasonably do within both of those constraints.
Other questions?
Hello, thanks for your talk.
Yes.
Do you use or do you plan to use artificial intelligence like Midjourney to? Yeah.
I wondered if this question was coming.
You know it.
Yeah, I've tried very much not to talk about AI today, because I think that is just a whole different kettle of fish. But I actually quite like AI for initial concepting. I think it can be this fantastic tool for people. Oh, sorry, my cat's walking over everything. Yeah, my for getting across images very simply and quickly, because yeah, you can just type in a description, and you know, sometimes it really works, sometimes it really doesn't. Would I ever use a mid-journey picture in a final project? I don't think so, no. For me, again, it's very much just another piece of reference, because I think it can really, whilst it can give some people and some artists some really fantastic ideas for compositions, and oh, I didn't think about putting these things together in this way. I think if you're not an artist, it can become, I don't know, there's something about AI art that you can almost always tell it's AI art at the moment. I'm sure that will change. But I think as a tool, it's really, really useful. I think it can be very good. Like for a pitch for Maze, I needed some little images just to show different times of day. And I couldn't really find what I wanted on Google Images or through searching for time. And so yeah, I used Midjourney for these smaller images. And so that was really helpful for pitch documents and things like that, where, you know, you don't have the budget to get a concept artist in, and you're trying to get funding and you're trying to do bits and pieces. So yeah, for me, AI is very much a tool. It's not something that should be relied on for the end product currently.
Yes, another question.
Hello, thanks for the talk. I can have maybe a silly question, but if you go back on the slide with the clothes of the woman, you always say know what you want. And on this slide, there is two type of gloves who are very different, like a short one in the butt and very long in the top right. So maybe when you show this to artists, is that a question that you like both of them and the artists have to choose which one you want to use, or how, why is there is so much gloves that are different? If you have to know what you want, you're supposed to have only one.
No, completely. Like, yes and no. You know, you still want your, like, I want my artist to have freedom. You know, like these 3 gloves to me show I want this particular shape and color and lace. Like, you know, do I want to mix and match? You know, do I want a lace with the embroidery on top, which was quite common at the time as well? You know, I said in my notes to Vince, I believe I said, you know, I'm not sure about the glove length. I wasn't sure what was going to work best on the model. You know, did we go for the little kind of wrist gloves, or did we go for the ones up to the elbow? I knew, again, I said, like, we knew we couldn't have her go past the elbow because they weren't like full on opera gloves. But I wasn't sure what was going to look best with what kind of dress he was putting together. And so, yeah, you need to give your artist freedom. Like, you can say, I want this, and say like, yes, no, but I don't want to basically just give them a jigsaw puzzle either. So that's why, you know, we kind of go for these little bits of elements. So like, you'll notice like all these 3 dresses have 3 different necklines. And again, it's like, yeah, they're all beautiful. They will all work within the genre. They will all work for the character. But the idea is, you know, they are reference. They are not what you should copy. But ultimately, like, once he's done it, you know, if he goes completely off piste, you know, it's like, okay, no, bring it back to more like this, and just gives that better idea of the final product. Does that make sense?
Yes, he nods.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
We have time for a couple more questions, if there
Sure.
are any in the room.
Hi, thanks a lot.
Hey.
My question is, how do you address using the work of other artists as reference? It's not a trick question. As a narrative designer, I'm doing the same a lot. And I think as an industry, we should maybe discuss this. You've said you sometimes hire artists.
Yes.
I think that might be the best answers. But do you have other ways of acknowledging using their work?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I have to say I have been really lucky in the so for example, like I've found artists who work I've loved and I have approached them. They have been free and available. So like with Aryan, I was like, I really like your style, your work. We're using you as a reference point. Let's go from there. With other pieces of art, like hang on, let me just flick back through. Like these are really classical paintings. Like I think once you go back to kind of like your art history, I think anything's fair game. But yes, I do think it's a very different thing when you're kind of using a modern artist. So like, where are we? Bear with me while I find. So this chap here is a modern artist. He is still creating pieces. And we actually, when we were planning the project, I actually had a section of budget set aside for him to come and do some character portraits and concept art for the project as well, because his work was so integral in the original designing of the characters and the original inspiration. It was like, yes, I absolutely want to get them on board. If possible, I'm very much a firm believer in don't ask, don't get. So it's absolutely worth getting a conversation with these artists. I think if you're doing a direct copy of someone, you have to get them involved because it's their work, it's their style. But otherwise, yeah, again, it goes back to the whole idea of if it's reference, it's, you know, it's this, but not this, it's that. And it's like, it's very much using something as a starting point for something. But I think when it comes to artists that you can easily get hold of, I think it's really important that, yeah, you drop them a line. Like, you know, you may pick an artist that will charge you an obscene amount of money and then you're like, oh, no, thanks. Can't actually do that. But I think that's where it gets a little more complicated. But yeah, I try and hire when I can.
Well, thank you. I think time's up. So
Okay.
Thanks a lot for being here remotely with us.
No
We
problem.
can give you a round of applause and believe you'll hear it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.